Awesome. Well, hello everyone, and Ryan and team, thank you so much for having me. You guys have had an action-packed day, I know, kicking off with Shadi and to many other sessions. You've got several exciting sessions to come after this. So I love this. I love everyone who's given the attention and time to join this HRTX day-long kind of insight today on sourcing from lots of different practitioners and people who are passionate about the task. So let me get stuck into what I want to share with you for the next 50 to 60 minutes or so. And please jump in with your questions. I love questions. I love conversation. We'll have hopefully lots of time at the end as well. And maybe Ryan, you can field some of those as well. But I want to cover these topics, right? This is my agenda I'm going to go through, right? These are my kind of top level observations, and I'll share this again at the end. You know, people are telling me sourcing is harder. They're telling me hiring managers, unfortunately, think it's easier. They're telling me that what was hot last year is now cold this year and vice versa. They're telling me that diversity, equity, and inclusion is now much higher on the agenda for them than it used to be. They're talking about layoff lists, how they're using them, how they work and how they don't work. They're reminding me that sometimes going back to the old is the new and how that's working for them. They're talking about how you start at home, how internal sourcing, internal recruiting is making a big comeback and how that's working. They're reminding me that boomerang hires, especially this year, can be really, really beneficial. And how candidates have changed priorities. They change like that. And what that means for you when you're engaging with that talent as a sourcer. And again, I've been reminded by several people, and the last was Stacey Zapar brought this back to my attention, of Glenn Cathy's keynote from many years ago at SourceCon about how referrals are so important, but critically, there's a different way you got to do referrals, and that's back on the agenda. So these are the topics I'm going to take you through. This is the learning. If none of this is of interest, you just go make a coffee, go get a beer for an hour, right? Come back at the end of it. But if you think you are interested in some of these topics, if you think you can learn, then I encourage you to stay with me, and hopefully you'll get some learning from this. So the first thing, sourcing is harder. Why is it harder? Let's talk about it, right? This is a data from the US up until I think about September or October of this year. And it shows the number of people in the US who quit their jobs by month. It tracks back all the way to the beginning of the noughties. And as you'll see, you know, the last time we had a massive big recession, the big downturn, you saw that the number of people who quit their jobs dropped dramatically, you know, from, you know, peak employment levels of about 3 million a month right down to about 1.5 million. And then what we saw is post 08, we saw that more and more people were comfortable to quit their job, all right? Right up to the very, very peak of it, 2019, the end of 2019, record numbers of people quitting their jobs by month. And it's not that they were really unhappy, it's just they were confident that quitting your job wasn't going to be a life sentence, wasn't going to be impose a financial penalty on you. But what happened in February, March of this year? That fell right back down to the worst recession levels. Why? Because nobody wants to be the last in. Job security at the moment trumps job opportunity for many, many people. And fear and anxiety is at its kind of all-time high. We're in lockdown, we're out of lockdown, we're back in lockdown, what will happen? You know, as Fauci said, we might have a vaccine in April. Will that work or not? Will we have many, many lockdowns from now till then? You know, when you are in a state of panic and fear, you change as little as possible. You hang on to the status quo, which means, I don't mean the albums from the 1970s, 80s rock stars. I mean, you know, you don't change things. You don't quit your job, right? You're happy to have your job. You hold on because it's one thing you can hopefully rely upon. So when you're going out there to the market trying to find talent, because if you're a sourcer, chances are you're not just trying to source unemployed people. Those individuals are quitting at a rate of, you know, 50% of the level they would have quit, including for your jobs. So it's going to be much harder to get people out of their jobs. It's a really, really important piece of data. I encourage you to basically share this data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis that shared this data here, and you can find it online. Number of people in the US who quit their job by month. Share this with your hiring manager, share this with your clients to kind of give them an insight in terms of how hard it is right now. And hard to find skills, well, they're still hard to find. On the right-hand side of the screen here is It's a diagram that McKinsey's published in a paper in 2017, which talked about what are going to be the hardest to find skills for the next decade. Like they predicted up to 2030, all right? And you see in the top right corner, important and growing, things like communication and negotiation, advanced IT, critical thinking, creativity, project management, technology design, right? These are skills that we're going to need more and more of, right? And they're hard to find. Now you fast forward to July 2020, when LinkedIn most recently published their top 10 in-demand jobs globally. Remember, the data set is looking for people, the job titles people have versus the job titles that people like, us are trying to find. Sources are typing in, trying to search for people, and the jobs being advertised. And lo and behold, the jobs in demand, slap bang in the middle of this pandemic, were the same jobs that were difficult to find 3 years ago in 2017. Communication, business management, problem solving, data science, data storage techniques, technology, technical support, leadership, project management, digital literacy, employee learning and development. These were hard to find skills 3 years ago, and they're still massively in demand skills now. And you know what the pandemic didn't do? It didn't create a new supply of talent. So we are in a situation where less people are willing to quit their jobs. The skills that many of us are still being asked to search for are still the most in demand, and nobody solved the supply problem, right? So you need to understand the data around this. Because the challenge is to problem two, hiring managers, they think it's easier. Why? Well, they're reading articles now about, about the job market and how there's so many people unemployed. And I get this. It makes sense to me, right? Why wouldn't you think it's easy when you're now being inundated with applications? If you pull back to the talent acquisition function, the recruiting function, right? The biggest kind of surprise to me, and it wasn't really surprising when you think about it, of course it's not, but the biggest change, if you like, in 2020 in terms of how you operationalize maybe a TA team doing 30, 40,000 hires a year was the influx of applications. I'm hearing from TA teams that they're getting 4x the amount of applications for their open jobs. That's insane, right? And the thing is, these are organizations who are very conscious about candidate experience, giving the right candidate experience. And they probably just got their budget cut, so they're cutting back on their TA staff, their function. So how do you cope with a situation where you have 4 times the amount of applications you've got to basically disposition, review, disposition, get back to with a great experience? The jobs you do have, your sources are finding it even harder to get people over the line for because they're less likely to quit. The skills you're looking for, they're still in demand by your organization, by everybody else. But you have a hiring manager thinking, you know what, there's large unemployment, and the data they point to are all these applications you're getting. It's really hard. So you need to be really good at bringing the data to the table to demonstrate to the hiring manager you're partnering with that she needs to see it from your perspective. I know there's a recession. I know unemployment went up. But you know what? It didn't go up in every single vertical. And we have huge competitors hunting for the same talent, and half the talent is willing to move jobs. So you need to work with me. I am still someone you need. My job got harder, not easier in this recession. So I need you to work with me. Really, really important to demonstrate that data. Third thing I want to talk about is how things quickly shifted from being cool to being hot to being hot to being cool. All right. Again, some data from LinkedIn that was sent to me in a press release about 6 weeks ago. And this is the hiring rate year-over-year change in industries. Anecdotally, we all get this. All of you who are recruiting in the last year get this. But it's nice to have the data because data is how you convince others and get them on your side. It's also how you plan. All of a sudden, we saw massive hiring changes in things like recreation and travel. Hey, no brainer, right? We're not going to travel as much. Airlines aren't hiring. Transportation companies for recreation aren't hiring as much. All right. Bars and restaurants aren't hiring as much. Entertainment, cinema, movie theaters, they're not hiring as much, right? Shows and gigs, course entertainment, recreation and travel, it's all way down. Media and communications is down. And of course, the other side, the hiring and transportation and logistics, way, way up, right? Amazon, hiring like crazy, right? Shopify, others who are basically hiring like crazy. All your distribution and logistics businesses ramped up because now you have to send the same amount of packages and stuff to more places. We're not sending it into a central store anymore or warehouse. We're sending it directly to someone's home more frequently as we're all locked down. Healthcare hiring up, but by the way, not always up. You remember the peak pandemic and lockdown, all non-essential surgeries were postponed. So you found that when I talk to sourcers in healthcare, they're like, some of my healthcare roles are way up, some of them are way down. I don't need as many, surgeons because I'm not doing surgery. The hospital stopped surgery. They're dealing with COVID cases and it doesn't really involve surgery. So again, even on a stat like that, it's not across the board. Construction's up. But in the middle, did you know that legal was down 10%? Finance was down nearly 10%. Software and IT services hiring is down 9%. Did you know that construction was up 9%? So it's really important to understand this because not only are you in one of these sectors, you might be able to hire talent from a sector that's been poorly affected. So you think about your sourcing strategy. So maybe you're hiring an accountant and you don't care where she works. And you're thinking, well, hang on a second, we're in construction and I'm trying to hire accountants. Maybe I should hire an accountant who's working in the entertainment industry, in recreation and travel, because their industry, although an accountant's an accountant's an accountant, CPA here is a CPA there. I don't really care. This job is okay, open to different sectors. Let's have a conversation with the hiring manager to say, can I go after somebody who's a CPA in one of these sectors? Is that okay if they have all the other skills we're looking for? Because I think I can get them over the line from their sector into our sector. We're in healthcare or we're in transportation. We're in a great sector. We have a lot going for us. How can we basically use this data to our advantage strategically to source talent from the right areas? Diversity, equity, and inclusion justifiably and importantly has come back to the fore, especially since the horrible summer we had in terms of when this came right back in our faces and it reprioritized it, which is the upside for many organizations. Well, organizations prioritized it, but they largely went straight to the recruiting team and said, fix our diversity problem. And that starts with the slate. It starts with you, the sourcer, going, well, heck, how am I going to find these people? And there's a real challenge there. I know you're smart enough. I know you've sat in on Irina's webinars, you've sat in on others to kind of learn all these diversity tricks, and you should. But you need to see the bigger picture, because I have spent years working with teams who are trying to source for diversity, who've become so frustrated that the rest of the organization wasn't coming with them. So you do have an obligation as a sourcer to understand the full challenge of diversity in an organization, because you don't want to just deliver your target. Hey, I gave a slate that was diverse, problem's over. You need to kind of be passionate and sell this to the rest of the business who's going to be involved in hiring, onboarding, and developing and managing that staff. It's why you need to understand your role in inclusivity. And I'm going to give you one piece of advice. I think this is really interesting research that was published in Harvard Business Review a few years ago. And please try and remember this and retell this story, and you can find the data. I'll give you a link if you need it. So I'm going to ask you on the chat here to maybe tell me what you think. If I present a short list to my hiring manager, and on that short list, I present 3 male candidates and 1 female candidate. Now, imagine 100 vacancies with that short list. I work 100 roles and I fill 100 jobs. And on every single slate, I give 3 men, 1 woman. Over the course of time on those slates, what percentage of the 100 roles are filled by women, do you think? So 100 roles, every time I give 3 men, 1 woman on the slate, over 100 roles, over time, how many women get hired? What percentage? Jump into the chat and let me know what you think. Tell me what you think in the chat from there, okay? Do you think, what's the ratio in which you think that those individuals get hired? So I want you to think about the maths first, right? Do the mathematics. 75% of the shortlist is male, 25% are female. Over time, I'm going to guess you're thinking, I know, 25% of women get hired. Well, the reality is it's not that good. In fact, statistically, over 100 roles, you'll never hire a woman. That's what the data suggests. It's a horrible piece of information. And I want that to sink in with you. Statistically, you're never going to hire a woman if you have 1 woman and 3 men on a slate over time. So let me ask you this. What if I had 2 women? Let's reverse this. What if I had 1 man and 3 women? So we'll reverse it around, right? 3 women, 1 man. Do we never hire the male? No, of course not. We actually hire the male 33% of the time. We hire the women 67% of the time. Okay, so it definitely doesn't bias against men when you reverse it. But what if I have slates that have 2 men and 2 women? Well, if you have slates that have 2 men and 2 women, I've good news. That's only one more woman. Now, if the man is going to get the job, he's going to get the job, surely, right? So in the first situation, if I put my best female and my best 3 males, well, surely, if you could get the best female against the best male and the best male keeps winning out, then the best male deserved the job, didn't he? Well, the data suggests that if you have a balanced slate, 2 women, 2 men, you will hire women 50% of the time, men 50% of the time. That's really important to understand this, because when we're tasked with, having a more diverse slate, you need to understand that diverse doesn't mean one candidate with diversity. It means you have to understand the statistics and the odds of the person getting hired. So I'd encourage you to think about that diversity, because if you have equity on that slate, if the best man is going to win, then he's going to win. No, actually, over time, you'll equally hire men and women. All right, it's about equal opportunity. And in fact, this is even more pronounced when you talk about non-white candidates. So while changing the status quo will increase the likelihood of hiring a woman by 79 times, it'll increase the chance of hiring a non-white candidate. If we don't take man, woman, we take white versus brown or black, then you're talking about 193 times more likely to get the job. Your role in diversity is critical. You present the slate, and you can influence in ways you don't even understand, all the way down to the hire and into the organization. Your role is important. You need to understand these stats, and you need to convince the rest of the business to work with you on it. Let's go to layoff lists. Unfortunately, many people have been laid off. It's a tough time, all right? And us recruiters, we have massive sympathy, but we're of course tasked as sourcers and recruiters with finding great talent. So many of you have gone to the layoff list and thought, this actually is a really, really good way of finding talent. And there's some great ones out there. You've got the likes of layoffs.fyi, which is a global kind of aggregator of these layoff lists. And you can search by country and region, the dates. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to understand who's been laid off. I chatted with Stacey Zabar, who I know has been on previous HRTXs. She's amazing, amazing speaker. Just such great insights and a wonderful way of discussing these insights. So she was sharing with me the team she's been working with for the last 9-10 months, intently working with the team, doing calls twice a week, understanding their needs, not training them so much as just working with them and helping them. We've really been kind of immersed in the sourcing role this year. And she shared with me how they're using layoff lists. And she was saying that everyone else she knows is going to the layoff list and then calling people on the layoff list. She said the smart sourcers aren't doing that. What they're doing is understanding that these are the people who were laid off. Everyone's going to call them, because when she started doing it and her colleagues started doing it, they were getting, hey, you're the 30th sourcer to reach out to me. Thanks, but I'm so busy. She started thinking about who was left behind. If they laid those people off, they probably kept let's call them better candidates, right? The better talent, are the skills that are more valuable to the organization, perhaps. And those folks who were left behind, they're thinking, my colleagues just got laid off. 30% of our workforce, am I next? I didn't like that in a lot of situations. And she realized that the real opportunity were those who were left. So you get your layoff list, you see what companies laid a bunch of people off, you then go look on LinkedIn or elsewhere for those talents who weren't laid off, you go after them and you go in with the uncertainty of, I see you guys were laid off 8,000 people, that's tough. Hey, you didn't get laid off, which is brilliant, you must be delighted, but you must be worried. Let's have a conversation. How can I help you? And that's been really effective. So it's using them for research more than a candidate list. Everyone else can use them as a candidate list, not you, not the smart sourcer. You're going to use them for research and go after the people that aren't on the list. And beautifully, you can probably figure out their email patterns because it's going to be on some of these lists as well, which makes life even easier. You can even name some of the people on the list from the teams. Which teams got gutted, who's left in those teams, and you can find them. So use them in a different way to the masses. Be different, be unique. Another great tip, again, that Stacey shared with me was how, the teams she's been working with have realized that old is the new. What do I mean by old is the new? Like your ATS. I know it sounds so uninteresting. It sounds so, this is not new training, this is not new learning. But sometimes reminding you of the obvious is really, really important. And it would be kind of remiss of me not to do that. If you have an ATS, a CRM, to you, chances are that's got a unique source of qualified talent with contact details. And the last time you may have used it, maybe it didn't work out for you. But I want you to think about how much change has happened in the last year. That source of candidates, going back to it, might just prove really, really fruitful right now. And talent is talent is talent. You know, I've said so many times before, as have others, greater people than me, like Glenn Cathy, who spoke about exotic sourcing for the sake of exotic sourcing, is bullshit. You shouldn't be doing that, right? It's great if you need to use it, and it's great to have the skills for those really difficult to find talents. But if they're somewhere else, go find them somewhere else. Don't be afraid of talent that sits in your ATS or CRM, right? They are unique to you, unique insights, unique data. You've got hopefully notes from your colleagues or from yourself from many years ago. You should go back to that. It's a really, really important source of talent. Next, this is a big one for the in-house recruiters listening, right? The big thing I'm hearing this year is internal mobility. Internal career mobility is so hot. Everyone's talking about how it's so important to hire internally for roles, right? Every talent acquisition leader is being asked to prioritize this. Organizations are laying off people here and they have to hire over here. They're saying, can we not just move people around? It's going to look really bad if we lay off all these people and then we're advertising vacancies at the same time. And you know what? It's also going to save us a whole bunch of money rather than paying layoffs, redundancies, severance checks for these folks. If we can just move them, we save a fortune, and we save a fortune maybe in recruiting, advertising as well, and all that stuff. So if you're an in-house recruiter, in-house sourcer, you know, internal talent is all the rage right now. And most of us don't have great talent marketplaces. If you are lucky enough to have a kind of internal talent pool, some sort of pooling technology that lists all your employees and their skills, fantastic. If you don't, hang on a second, you do. So if you don't have a dedicated one, don't forget you do have one. It's called LinkedIn, right? Not many sourcers search with employer name the same company they currently work for, because they don't have to, because they're not looking for internal talent. But if you're genuinely in an organization who's mentioned this is important, you can start being a sourcer sourcing internally. Trust me, it's not going to work any other way. Trying to produce shortlists and suggest these to your hiring managers. I'm not saying go after the candidates directly, because there's going to be different rules in your organization about whether to do that or not to do that. But you can highlight talents in your organization who might have the skills to move over to this role, either relocate from a geographical perspective, upskill, reskill, retrain for those roles. That could be a really great tool right now. I know a lot of organizations who've been relying on their sourcing team, who have been perhaps underutilized because a number of external vacancies went down, to start using those techniques to source internally. It's all the rage now, but don't forget, you all have an internal talent marketplace. It's called LinkedIn if you just look for your current employer. Boomerangs. So boomerang hiring, people have been talking about this for years, but boomerang hiring is kind of pretty important. And it's more important now than ever. There's a lot of talk about how, you know, individuals who perhaps, think about this, left your organization 12 months ago, 18 months ago. Maybe they went to work for that cool new startup. Maybe they went to work for that, you know, fantastic new travel company that's booming at the moment. Well, a lot changed in Q1 of this year, a lot. I'll get to it in a second, but people's priorities change as well. So candidates who left your organization, a lot of recruiters just assume they left because they don't want to work in your company. And oftentimes your experience in the past might have been that to get them to come back is difficult. More and more organizations are realizing that to go back to former employees who left on good terms, employees who are good employees, productive, but chose to go somewhere else, well, the grass might not be so greener on the other side now. And all it takes is you, the smart sourcer, to reach out to them, to tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, would you consider coming back? Can't guarantee, you know, the business will take you or you'll be a good fit, but, you know, from a business point of view, a TA leader, VP of talent acquisition, who runs a 450-person team, who makes 40,000 hires a year, told me that, well, of his two metrics he's measured on, the second metric is time to ramp up, right? As a TA leader, he's responsible for time to ramp up. How do I make sure that the people we hire ramp up as quickly as possible? No better way than to go back to somebody who already worked in your organization, who fit in, who was able to do things, understands the culture, the politics, how it works, your systems, all of those things. Their speed to ramp up is going to be much, much higher. If they're a good alignment, if there's no negativity on their employee record, again, these are important things to check out. These can be a great source of talent. And you got to remember to kind of leverage those boomerang hires, to go after your alumni, try and reach out to them. I was so impressed a few weeks ago on Halloween night at Social Talent. We ran a little Kahoot game at the end of the evening on a Friday. If you remember, October 31st was a Friday, or was a Saturday, October 30th, I should say. And we did a quiz. And we had, our team had organized for loads of our former employees to film little videos of questions, right? Kind of a trivia thing. And it was so brilliant. And it was brilliant to see those folks who left our organization, went to work for other organizations, be so willing to come back and help us, right? And I'm not saying they wanted to come back and work for us, but I was saying that they, people have fond memories of their previous employer a lot, and they're willing to do things for them, willing to help with referrals potentially, but perhaps willing to go back. Our first hire this year, our first hire post-pandemic, after the pandemic started, when we froze jobs and then we were, by the summertime, able to hire again. The first person we hired was a boomerang hire back into social talent. Why? Because the reason he left had changed in light of the new economy and decided to give us a go again. And he's working out fantastically. So think about those boomerang hires and how you can leverage that source of opportunity. And I mentioned changing priorities. Changing priorities is such an important topic to talk about. When we went into this pandemic, what was important to candidates were things like, more advancement, more opportunity. I want to work in a sexier a sector. Maybe I want to work in a cool office that they buy all this food and stuff. That's all changed, right? Think about your values from who you admire in the workforce, right? I was on a panel conversation earlier on today, and a good friend of mine, Joanna, was talking about how when she was in school, her teacher said to her, and this was to try and, put her down, said, if you don't pay attention in class, you'll end up as a shelf stacker, as in a shelf stacker in a grocery store. And it's funny how in this pandemic, come April, May, we realized that those individuals that we used to call shelf stackers in a derogatory term, they're now our frontline workers. They were keeping food on the shelves during the worst of the lockdown, and they became vital. Your van driver, your postal service employee, they became vital to the economy. And it's amazing how we saw such a positive way, such a change in values. We also started seeing industries in a different light. Industries that we thought were old and dead, all of a sudden became industries that looked after their staff, that really had a sense of belonging and treated their people well and were stable and had big reserves. So a lot of the kind of shiny kind of tech companies all of a sudden didn't seem so attractive. We used to go for nimbleness. I want to join this company. They're starting up their share options. They're growing. There's a small team. I have loads of opportunity. And then it was like, ooh, that sounds like a scary place to be in a recession, a scary place to work when there's so much uncertainty. I value stability. We work with Deutsche Telekom. Deutsche Telekom own Sprint in the US. And Deutsche Telekom across Europe through Q2 and Q3, they really, really did a great job changing their employer branding to talk about infrastructure, because in telecoms with mobile masts and keeping internet on, they became frontline. And it's just an old organization and a large organization. That stability became a really, real strong attraction to the market. So they changed their whole employer branding message very, very quickly to basically promote values and history that last year would have been terrible things to promote, because they said old and big and boring. But all of a sudden, 2020 with new values, people have looked at organizations like that very differently, and all of a sudden they've become the organizations to hire for. So make sure your messaging is correct, and that you're leveraging this and understanding that people are moving for very different reasons. And if you're relying on surveys and studies that were conducted before March of this year, they're probably out of date. Right? The data that suggests people move for this reason, I argue that's all in the bin now. It's all in the trash, right? Because it has changed massively, right? So think about how those values have changed, right? Think about how you're leveraging that in the conversations with candidates, how you're changing that in your employer branding as well. It's really, really important. And last but not least, I want to talk about Ryan's panicking, because Ryan's thinking, my goodness, you're finished very early. Hopefully we have questions. Hopefully we can fill the time, but I don't want to keep people on this for too long. But referrals, right? Referrals, they're always really important, right? But I want you to think of it differently about referrals. I want you to go back to what Glenn Cathy said about referrals. And he said that what we do when we look for referrals is usually just, it's the wrong way around, right? We go and say, hey, who do you know? Or you blast out jobs to your colleagues or your workforce, and you say, here's what we're hiring for. It would give you an incentive to refer somebody, right? And his argument was that you need to tell them who they know. Don't ask them, is what we always do. Tell them. What did he mean? What he meant was, as a sourcer, you source, and you basically source and see, in your team, let's say you're hiring for the engineering team, you're hiring for the sales team, you search within the connections of the team. and you find the people who are really interesting. And then you go and say, hey, I found 5 people you used to work with, they're connections of yours, they're colleagues on colleagues on LinkedIn, or they're friends of yours on Facebook or whatever, right? And you say, I think these are 4 excellent candidates. What do you think? Do you think they'd be good people? And could you introduce me? All right, so you're not asking them to refer people, because that's a really difficult thing to do. Can I think of 4 people that'd be great for this job? It's like, I'm not a recruiter. That's your job. You go think of who's good for this. I know lots of people. I've got relations. I don't know, and you're not going to get that effort, that help from that person. But if you present the list and go, I know you know these people. Would you recommend them? And can you introduce me to any of these? It's such an easy thing for someone to do. And also, you've used your expertise to vet and screen people. Also, if you give them 4 names, they'll go, there's a 5th person I'm thinking of, just like those that you haven't shown to me. Why don't I recommend her as well? So don't ask them who they know. You got to tell them who they know. That's super, super important. I think that was awesome advice from Glenn. And I've seen that being a really, really good tool for sourcers post-pandemic, is going back to these techniques to go, okay, who can we get that's going to be a guaranteed, or as close to a guaranteed success culturally within the organization, aligning to our values, they'll be the right fit. Well, let's go back and ask our current employees who they would refer, not by giving them a license to give us a blank list, but by telling them who we think they should be referring and getting validation of that. So a hat tip to Glenn for that fantastic tip. So let's go back and recap, right? I want to recap on the trends that sourcers are seeing out in the market right now, what's happening in the world. Sourcing's harder. The data suggests it's harder. You know this. I mean, I don't need to tell you this, but you need to perhaps share this with others in the organization. To number 2, those hiring managers who think it's easier. You need to get them to understand that this is not the situation. It isn't easy because there's loads of people out there. They're the wrong people. They're getting in the way. They're creating this noise, right? It's like saying it's great. It's easy to find a good song. Oh, play a good. Here's a trick for you. Play a good song on your phone and go. Isn't it easy to find a good song? Here's a great song. Then you say, imagine there was 8 other songs playing at the same volume. You think you could pick out the good song? It's really hard to, right? So your job is to pick out that good candidate. And now you've introduced all this noise and interference in the way. And then all of a sudden that candidate, that song is harder to actually get to. It's twice as hard to get to. So you're kind of thinking about all these obstacles. You need to try and somehow demonstrate to your hiring manager and prove to her that this is harder. Hot is cold, cold is hot. You need to understand the changing industries that are now cool, that were not cool. I need to watch this closely because it depends on where you are. Is your state, your part of the world, your country in lockdown, not in lockdown? Whether you're in lockdown is going to change. If you're just coming out of lockdown, retail and hospitality might be rising. The demand is way up as we try and refill those restaurants, those stores with staff. If it's going into lockdown, they're about to become unemployed again and could be flood the market. So there are industries that are consistently doing well. There are industries that are not performing well. You may have seen Amazon stock fell just short of 1% a couple of days ago when Fauci announced that there might be a vaccine available in April, because people started thinking, oh, hang on a second, the period of direct to door delivery is going to drop again, and it's going to drop sooner than we thought. Now, it's only 1% and it rose again, but that's the kind of thing that happens, right? So you got to watch those trends and understand what's happening in the market. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, get with it. I gave you one example there of something you need to understand, but there's so much more to understand about diversity hiring. And you need to just go with inclusion first. Inclusivity doesn't come after diversity. It does in the flow of someone joining your organization, but actually when you really think of it, you've got to portray an inclusive organization, which means you have to have an inclusive organization. Otherwise, having a diverse slate, getting someone over the line, getting them hired is going to turn into a leaky bucket, because they're going to come back on your desk with that same vacancy 6 or 9 months later when the person goes, this isn't the place for me. I don't feel welcome. I don't feel included. I'm gone out the door. Layoff lists, they're really, really valuable, but not in the way you think. Just take Stacey Zapar's advice that you need to use them as a kind of research tool and not an actual list of candidates. Okay, don't go for the obvious route here, the obvious route. Go for the insight, the data. Be smart, be clever. Think about who got left behind. Think about the messaging you're sending that's going to leverage the uncertainty and fear that might be left behind with those employees, and try and get that talent to sign up for your roles. Old is the new. Don't forget your ATS, your CRM. You should always be starting there. Start and look at candidates you've already come across. You know, we over prioritize the new in this world. What's new on Netflix? What's new on Spotify, right? There's some great old stuff there. You know, I watched Notting Hill last weekend. Do you remember that movie with Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant? I'm always looking for the new movie. There ain't many new movies out there right now. I watched Notting Hill again, and it's a delight. I'm going to admit it. I love these movies. What can I say? Start at home. Okay, your existing talent is probably more important than ever. Your organization is likely talking about internal career mobility. If you haven't been asked as a sourcer to source internally, start asking questions about how can I help? Can I apply my skills as a sourcer to try and find the talent in our organization, particularly if it's a large, complex organization. Boomerang hires. Boomerang hires are going to be different now, right? Because whereas boomerang hires may not want to come back to you, because why would you go backwards? Maybe their priorities have changed and therefore they see you in a whole different light and they'd be delighted to go back and work for your organization. Think about sourcing based on old employer. Previous employer was your current employer name, and don't forget to say current employer is not you. So previous employer is your employer name. Current employer is not that name. You got to try and filter that stuff out in your search. And priorities have changed. As I mentioned, the reason why people will take a job is fundamentally different today than it was this time last year. It's fundamentally different. The priorities are so different. So that might change strategically who you're sourcing from, what pools, what kind of talent you're going after, but also the messaging you're sending, how you're trying to convince people to work in your organization or leave another organization. Remember, those priorities have changed. And the last point there being Glenn Cathy's sage advice. Referrals are awesome, but not again as you know it. A bit like Stacey's advice earlier off the layoff lists. Don't do what everyone else does by asking people who they know. Tell them who they know. You're a sourcer. Go find the hot list, know who they're connected to, go to those individuals in your organization, go, hey, you know these people, but what do you think? Can you introduce me? Who would you recommend and refer from this list? Don't ask them to do all your work for you. They're never going to do that. It doesn't work out, right? Give them the information because you're the expert, and then ask them to verify that and help you with it. That's how you make referrals work. So Ryan, I'm gonna stop sharing here. I know I'm crazy early, so my apologies for that. But I'm gonna go back to you and see if we have any questions or any comments from there. You're on mute, dude, or maybe it's just me.
It was me.
Good.
It was me. Sorry about that. All right, we do have a handful of questions. I'll ask them. And feel free to go in depth because we do have some time. How do you recommend that we find and build a layoff list?
Oh wow! So it's a good question, right? So there are several sites like the one I mentioned there that has literally aggregated these layoff lists for you. So the layoff list, what's interesting and important on layoff lists is still geography, right? So when I first started looking at layoff lists, it was like, that's amazing that company put a list of talent up, but they're not in the geography that I'm hiring for, right? So the layoff list FYI or whatever the address was I shared there, they have a lovely filter that shows the geography of the candidate, so you can narrow down where are people being laid off. That's kind of important, right? If Airbnb are laying off staff, that's great, but are they laying off staff in the geography I'm hiring for? That's going to impact not just who's on the list, because again, even if we're not going for that, are they laying off people in my region, my state? Because it's not going to be equal, right? I know of one of our customers who was telling me that they have laid off their recruiters in California because they're going to move them to, they had a second recruiting team from a company they acquired in a much lower cost state in the US. So all of a sudden their California-based recruiters all got laid off in the last couple of weeks, and they're going to be hiring in this other state, which I won't mention. That's much, much lower cost, less than half the cost. That kind of stuff is happening, right? So you need to be able to go for the lists, but don't forget you're also looking for patterns, right? Doing searches of, LinkedIn have, I can't remember what the phrase is. They encourage people to put this phrase if they're looking for a job on their LinkedIn profile, and they've got filters there. But you can just look at the data week to week to see which companies have the highest increase in numbers there. That's like a layoff list in an informal way. So it's kind of being smart about what does the data tell me? It's patterns. I've always said sourcing is kind of pattern recognition. So what patterns do we observe? How do we build patterns? And you have to kind of almost take a baseline sometimes, and then work from that baseline week to week or day to day to see what's changing. That pattern gives you information, right? That's what you're looking for. You're looking for a pattern, you're looking for information that then tells a story, that gives you insight that you can take back and change your strategy. So you can search, you can also search for layoff lists. You can go into communities and forums, and don't be afraid of call them old-fashioned ways. Go on to a Facebook sourcing group and go, can anyone recommend a good place for layoff list for X, as in that state, that country, whatever, right? You know more than anyone, Ryan. The community is really strong in sourcing. They will help you out. Like, there's no competition in handing over a layoff list to somebody else who's recruiting for different roles. So leverage the community, right? Sometimes the best way of sourcing is to go ask a question. Source the answer, by asking a question, not necessarily a Boolean search string.
Right. Yes. So how can an organization set a process for inclusion, and what are some technologies that we should consider?
It's a great question. I'm not just saying great question because it's a good thing to say, right? I'm glad you asked that, whoever asked that. So inclusivity, a good friend of mine, Joe Gershon, I don't even know Joe Gershon. Joe and Jason used to be part of Talent Anarchy. They spoke a lot of HR conferences and in a radical way. And Joe's from Omaha, and he speaks extensively across the US on inclusivity. And he's an angry vet, right? And his anger is brilliant because he makes you listen and pay attention. But if you listen, he's got amazing things to say. And I watched, he did some courses for us on the social talent platform last year. And one of the courses I watched, it really inspired me because he described inclusivity. He talked about DE&I. He said, DE&I is like exercise. All right, Ryan? So we said, we all get that exercise is important. You get it? You agree. That eating healthily and working out, they're really good things to do. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you become healthy and fit by agreeing with exercise and working out?
I wish it was that easy.
I wish it was that easy. And being an inclusive organization and making efforts on diversity doesn't come from just agreeing with it is not enough, right? And inclusion is an active process. It's as active as exercise. Exercise is hard. It hurts. Your body, everything about you wants to not do it, right? You get up in the morning and go, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go for my run, my cycle, my swim, my workout. I want to roll over back in bed, take 20 minutes more to myself, just do something else. It's hard. And you have to fight against your instinct to do the exercise. You feel better. It is a better thing to do afterwards, but it is always hard, right? Anyone who says otherwise is a liar.
This coming from the guy that runs 5 miles every day.
But I still want to go back to bed every morning. Don't get me wrong, right? But I got to do it because I know if I don't, I know the consequences in my mental health if I don't, right? So to me, inclusivity, as Joe tells it, is an active effort. It's hard work. Your body and your mind will fight against it. It will try to do everything in its power to do the normal thing, which is not very inclusive. And you have to take deliberate action to be inclusive. So your steps to be inclusive, first of all, you have to understand they're deliberate. So for example, my business partner, Vince, was talking about virtual meetings like this about a year ago. We were having some virtual meetings and some people were logging in. And it was said to him by a colleague of his or friend of his who worked in a fully virtual, fully remote business at the time, right? Rare back then, but they said, when you're having meetings, right? When you have a conference call or whatever, and some of you are in person and some of you are on Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever, if you're in the room and only 2 people are dialing in, it is not very inclusive. If everyone else continues the meeting in the room, you have a camera off to the side with the 2 people who dialed in or 1 person. That if one person is dialing in, everyone should get their computer in front of them, their mobile device, and be online and have a camera on, because they need to experience what it's like for the person who's not. You need to be inclusive. To not do that is not being inclusive. And it really hit me. And we started doing it in social talent last year before the pandemic. We started saying if one person's dialing in, everyone's got to have their individual laptop, not crowd around one laptop. You got to experience it. And now we've become a mainly virtual business. So that's going to be our priority. It's always going to be virtual first. And so inclusivity is hard, right? It's also doing things like you walk into a room, Ryan, right? So you walk into a room and you maybe have some of your colleagues and maybe you're the boss, right? And your colleagues go, what do you think, Ryan? It's kind of saying, recognizing that it's not very inclusive for you to take control, right? So you might challenge someone in the room. It might challenge your colleagues, for example, to write down their opinions before they come to the meeting, because that means you're going to be more inclusive with ideas. You're not going to all kind of just going to go with what Ryan wants. Or a really good technique Joe suggested was in things like meetings, you might pick somebody each meeting, go, you're going to be the devil's advocate. Don't tell anyone. Your job is to be contrary. You're going to disagree with everything. because I want you to force the issues, okay, to be more inclusive of other ideas. Take the opposite stance. Don't tell people you're doing it. All of these are very specific examples, but my point, Ryan, is, and the point Joe was making was, it takes deliberate effort. It's not going to come to you naturally. Just agreeing with it and saying, I'm up for the fight, actually won't work. You need to probably go to somebody and ask the questions of somebody who's already got there to say, what do I do day to day? Tell me the exercises that I need to do. What am I doing? I'm doing the equivalent. What's the equivalent of push-ups, of skipping ropes, of treadmill in the inclusivity world? The hard things I'm going to have to force myself to do.
Yeah, and I think the key there is deliberate action, and I think that's a really good way to say it. Staying on the D&I theme here, do you think D&I will become a separate sourcing function in the future?
So it already is in some instances, right? I'm sure you've come across this already. You've got diversity sourcers. Go online and search LinkedIn and job title for diversity sourcer. You'll find them. So it's a deliberate intention to kind of to take an action that drives more pipeline in there, right? So so I think it's going to be, because it is, right? It's already a separate function in some organizations. And typically how it works is that if you're pooling. So again, when I look at sourcing on scale, I typically see there's two levels of sourcers. There's sourcers who work on a rec and directly source for the rec. And then there's sourcers who work on a persona, or they pool. And you typically see diversity sourcers more on the pooling, persona-based type sourcing. You know, I want to hire inside sales, SaaS kind of folks with enterprise sales and background or whatever. And I want you to find just diverse talent. I want you to find females. I want you to find black and brown. I want you to find Latinx, whatever the diversity is for you. And their job is to deliver a number into the talent pool. Qualified, vetted people who come from that background, and you are literally ticking a box of target, but it's okay. I'm going to put them into the CRM, ready to go. And then you have your rec comes in, as you know, and the rec finds a talent pool that's much more diverse instantly, because the diversity sourcer, whose job is just to make sure that that particular demographic is represented, is putting those talents into the mix. So that's where I think it works really well. But I think on a smaller scale, which is more common, it's just part of everyone's job to think about, how do I find that mix? And ethically making sure that you have a slate. Even if you haven't been asked to be a diversity sourcer, if you haven't been given a goal, look at that data from Harvard Business Research and say, I can play a role. Like, screw these people. I'm going to just deliberately put people on the short list, and I'm going to play around with this and see if it works, and see if the candidates I put on that are more diverse start getting interviews, start getting hired at a higher ratio. They will.
So a question came in. I'm going to put this up ahead of the others because there are a couple questions that are similar to this, and I know it's a popular question, so I'm glad it was asked. How do you differentiate yourself from anyone else asking to be added to a vendor list? And they followed it up with, I can fill any job, but we have a serious lack of jobs, so I'm trying to do more business development, which is new to me. And that's a really big question that we see in all of the Facebook groups, throughout the community and everywhere. And it's never actually, it's always debated in there, and people say, just pick the phone up, but it's never actually answered by someone who probably has a lot of experience in that field. So I think this could be a really good question for you.
So Ryan, it's been a while since I've been in that situation, right? So, but I think the basics haven't changed, right? So one is that you got to get to the person who has the pain, right? And PSLs and so on and so forth exist, and they're really hard to get into. You got to break down the doors, right? So when you try to get into a PSL, go, hey, I want to work with your organization. You go into the recruiting or the HR organization, they're like, we got a preferred supplier list. You're not on it. Goodbye. Can't work with you, right? They're not likely to have the exact pain, right? They've got recs, they've got everything else, but the hiring manager has the pain, okay? Or the recruiter working on the exact rec has the pain. If you know it's a job that's really difficult. And to me, it's like, I always went in there, right? Now, it causes problems because you go into the hiring manager and then you piss off the recruiting team. So the hiring manager uses you, wants to work with your rec, but the recruiter that is really, really peed off because you went behind her back, and they never want to work with you, and they'll work against you, right? So it is a fine balance. But I do think the hiring manager need is really, really important. But if you can somehow leverage you talk to a hiring manager, but then go back and work with the recruiter, and again, disarm them. But I think you need to look at, they need to see that you're not trying to trick them, right? So I always take the long game, so if you're working there going, listen, I had to reach out from somebody recently and said, I'll give you a short list for free. I'll show you my skills. I'll show you can find more people. I'll get them to an interview with you. And if that works out for you, would you engage me to work on other stuff for you? You give me your hard stuff. And as a business owner, I was like, this is interesting. Like I admire this person to go, I'm willing to put a couple of days work in for you, that you'll get a free service, but like it's on the condition that you work with me. And I would work with somebody like that, to improve them, right? So you got to prove you can do it. Saying I can recruit somebody or anybody for you, like everyone can say that. Prove it to me. Like I used to show them actual real candidates, right? I kind of pre-close somebody and go, if I had this on, I don't have this role on, but if I had this on, would you talk to them? Is this organization doing this? Yeah, I'd have a conversation. And I go and say, I'm not saying I can find you somebody. I'm saying I found you somebody. I spoke to them. They're willing to work with you. Are you happy to engage them through me? And if you're not happy, I get it. I'm going to still let them go ahead and apply directly. But I did go out of my way to try and find this person for you. I had a conversation with them. I sold them. I closed them on the role. Do you want to have a conversation with them? I'd like you to respect the fact that I did some work and give me credit for it at the end. We'll work out the terms later on. And if you don't want to do that, I'm not going to stop the person from approaching you directly. But that's kind of saying I have them. And it's very hard for an organization or a recruiter to say no to that. And again, when you're going, listen, we'll sort the terms and conditions out later on. We'll agree stuff. But I think recruiters come in too early and go, can I have the rec? I promise you I'll do the work later on. Can we agree high fees straight off? It's like you haven't proven anything at that point. You gotta put yourself out there and take a risk, I think.
So what's your response then to a recruiter, and I'm sure you've heard this before, that says, I don't work for free. I've got 20 years of experience. I'm good at what I do. My time is my money, and all those things that people say. What is your response to someone that, if you're giving this advice to do the work and take the back-ended approach, what do you say to that person?
I'd love to meet them because they're the only goddamn recruiter in the world I've ever met who doesn't work for free. We all have worked for free, Ryan. You know what it's like when you work. If you're an agency, you've worked as a contingency recruiter. A lot of the recs you work on and get shortlisted for, you don't get paid for. Right. If you're internal, you've worked on roles that have gone on hold, that have been frozen, that have gone nowhere. Right. We all work for free at some point. Don't fool yourself into thinking you don't work for free. Get off your high horse, right, is what I say to that person. Right. You do occasionally work for free. But rather than, let's say, as a staffing agency recruiter doing contingency work and you're working one in 6 roles you get paid for, why don't you get paid for 1 in 2? Go out there, really focus on the smaller number of people you were willing to work with, work the hard stuff. It won't always work out for you, but you will increase your close rate. So don't fool yourself into thinking you don't already work for free. Chances are you do.
Chances are you are, yeah. And that's a great answer. I think that's a huge takeaway. All right, let me see if we can get one more in here or two. What is the best way to present the referrals to them and to identify those referrals without seeing their list of LinkedIn connections? To tell them who to hire, is there a good tool for you to use? And then they said, I've heard of a tool called Consider that does this as well and automate.
Yeah, I don't know Consider. I'd like to know more. Maybe the person can just tell me what that tool is. Me and you can have a look into it. And if you know what it is, Ryan. I know with LinkedIn Recruiter, you can search for connections of a named person, right? So if you're looking to have a LinkedIn Recruiter license, you can do that. And there are some hacks and tricks that have been shared online, ways to hack your URL to do searches within individuals' networks. So the how to do it, there's tools, there's LinkedIn Recruiter, and there's hacks for LinkedIn.com that allow you to actually search within someone's network. But how you present them to the first point, to me, it's kind of simple. You gotta just share them as they are. You're not going to approach the candidate, obviously. You're going to give them the list and go, I have found these talents that I think are connected to you. You know them, or you're in your network, etc. Would you like to share them? Would you like to help me with these candidates? Can you introduce me, etc. Right? And so, it's really easy. Like an email with the names and a quick summary on how they're connected, critically how or why you think they're connected with them, why you think you went to school with them, you're connected on LinkedIn, I saw you commented on their post, they're Facebook friends of yours, etc., right? So sometimes remind people. If you sent me a list of 5 people I don't know I know them. Sure, like you, Ryan, you're connected with lots of people on Facebook and LinkedIn. You don't know. But it's kind of going you might go, I don't know them, but I didn't know, I see them a first degree connection. Okay. And you go, they might come back and say, I don't know them. And the recruiter might say, well, that's okay. Would you mind, because you're connected as a first degree connection, forwarding this message on my behalf? The person goes, sure, cool, whatever. You know,
Right.
so like it's always about how do you make it easy? Remember back to the exercise analogy. We're all lazy, right? Our brains are lazy. It's like somebody go, can you recommend someone? I don't have to think of all the people I know and make a
Right.
recommendation. You know, can you refer these people? Make it super simple for me to go, yes, I would. Give me as much information as I need, but not too much to make a quick decision and go, yes, I can. Yes, I will. Can you refer them? Here's the message to send. I'll give you an example of my team recently. They asked me to do reach out to a bunch of people that were in my network. So my sales team said, Johnny, you're connected with these folks. Same analogy. Can you help
Mm.
me? Right. So that happens a lot in my business. I've got a big network and I can
Yeah.
reach out to lots of folks. Right. But I tell you, the ones I send are when they go, can you reach out to blah, blah, blah? Here's exactly what I'd like you to say. And I go, copy, paste, send. No problem. You're
Right.
done. You're welcome. But if I have to think of the message, I'm like, oh, what will I say? What's my reason for the approach? I'm probably going to do something else and forget about it. So remember, that's the same when you're getting the referral, getting the hiring manager to get involved. Make it so easy for her to help you.
Right. All right. Let's do one more question. And we went through a ton, and thank you for answering these. These are really helpful. What are you seeing as a trend in the first part of next year in our industry? And they have recruiting in parentheses. So what are you seeing in a trend in the first part of next year in recruiting in terms of hiring? What types of roles, and will they focus, and will the focus be on sourcing and recruiting?
Wow. In the first 6 months is a difficult one, right? I think I've seen that there's been a renewed investment in sourcing and response management by large organizations, and that's going to continue to happen, right? So it's going to happen in the beginning of next year. Why? Because budgets just got signed off and they get implemented come January. So organizations trying to deal with this challenge of, hang on, and I'm talking about enterprises, because I need to make it or kind of point out the difference between small to medium-sized businesses and then enterprises. Small to medium-sized businesses are being killed at the moment, like killed. High unemployment, decimated. Enterprises are largely fine. For the stock market's pretty okay at the moment because it's represented by enterprises. Small to medium-sized businesses are really struggling. Enterprises, you know, for this is another recession. Like every 8 to 10 years, we ride out this storm. There'll be many more. It's fine. We slow down our spending for a bit, then we go back up again. They're already planning to spend for next year, but critically, they're going, you know, we've got this problem of huge amount of extra volume of applications. We need to, and we want to have good candidate experience. So we need a response management solution. And then we want to be more targeted in our approach because advertising actually is going to be counterproductive. It's going to cost us money to respond. So we need more laser focused sourcing. And they're investing in sourcing tech and response management tech. And that's going to increase. So what it might do is accelerate the automation of a lot of sourcing because the tech is getting so much better. We saw that fantastic demo just before this as well, right? There's some really cool tools. The steps to then automate that for a lot of sourcing, not all, a lot of sourcing are there with a lot of companies. I talk to very senior leaders of massive teams responsible for tens of thousands of hires a year, and many of them have already put the tech in. And it used to be a conversation about, does the tech work? Now it's like, it works, which one will I go for? Which one is the most cost effective? So sourcing and response management are going to be huge, but it isn't necessarily going to mean more jobs. It's going to mean potentially more tech, but yes, different jobs there. So I think that's going to be a little bit more accelerated. We're going to see a lot more focus on that in the first 6 months of next year.
Okay, I lied. Let's do one more. One came in that I think is actually it's a good one to end with. One advantage to the new remote world is potential candidate willingness to take part in virtual events, very similar to this. Do you have any tips for running virtual events as a sourcing strategy?
So it's a really good idea, right? So I don't know if he shared it earlier on. I missed Jose's talk earlier on? Did he talk about the work that they're doing with Microsoft?
I don't remember offhand.
Right, so I'm going to steal that. And if you've listened to it, and if you did share this, let's do it again. I thought it was really amazing. So Jose runs an RPO business, a sourcing team. He's got a couple hundred people who work for him who source on behalf of large employers. And they've tried to push the boundaries because he's awesome. I love Jose. He's pushing the boundaries of sourcing. They created a whole landing page and site for Microsoft that teaches you high-end Microsoft technologies. You register and you pay like 49 euros, $49 or whatever to do a course. But what they're doing is that's a lead gen strategy.
Sure.
They're pooling candidates who have an interest in that technology to the degree that they want to improve their learning in it. And then they're using that as a pool of candidates to then fill jobs for Microsoft. And it's working really, really well. They've taken that and scaled it to 2 other companies that are doing it on scaled sourcing, essentially, because Jose's like, this is sourcing, but I'm doing volume attraction in a clever way. So an event, because that's an event, but it's maybe an event over a long period of time. It's the same principle, right? You create demand for demand for something that will attract a certain demographic, who are the demographic you want to find, right? I'm gonna go back 7 years now and tell you a story, Ryan, of when I saw this first done really well. Dun & Bradstreet, D&B, were setting up their international head office in Ireland, and they were hiring some serious high-end developers. And there was a recruiting firm assigned to try and recruit them, and they called me up and said, can I give some advice? I was thinking, how do I scale it? It needs to make 100 hires or something, right? Crazy number for Ireland. And what we did was we created a webinar, and it was actually GoToWebinar. I told you back in the day we used this software, dude.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I'm gonna keep poking you. And it was funny. We basically brought the CTO of Dun & Bradstreet on the webinar.
Yeah.
Now I tell you, this was the most boring webinar I've ever been on, Ryan. Like, I was falling asleep. But if you were in that world, if you understood the technologies, there was really exciting bleeding edge stuff.
Yeah.
They brought in like a couple of 100 registrations, and they had, registration fields, because actually GoToMeeting is really good for that. This software is really good. Jose has written a great book, by the way. It's free, a free book. You can download in English on everything you need to know about running online seminars, which software to use to get signups, not to get signups, etc., right? And critically, you need a software, and GoToMeeting is really good at this, and you know this. It's better than Zoom and everyone else because it has lead capture data, and you can profile people, which is a sourcer's dream. Sure. And the recruiting team took the sourcing list and they went after only the names that had job titles that were interesting, and said, hey, let's say the CTO's name was Ryan. Did you enjoy Ryan's talk? I did, fantastic. Yeah. I represent Ryan's team. We're hiring. We'd love to talk to you. I'd like to have a conversation. So they got the list, they got the details, but they'd also impressed them indirectly by saying, this is your future boss. And it was a good talk. And so I think from a sourcing perspective, events like that are really narrowly focused on something that's a great event. No one wants to hear from the recruiter, right, or the sourcer, but they'd love to hear from the person in the organization. So virtual career fairs do this all the time, right? They get this in the early career hiring space. So it's just applying that to professional hiring or anything else. Get an expert from the business who is really a good presenter with good knowledge, and then basically create a landing site, promote that. The promotion of that brings the right audience in. Never mention jobs. Never talk about jobs. Talk about the topic. Use that list then as lead gen to go back out and have as your first long list from a sourcing perspective and go after the talents. It's old stuff, but it works.